The world was ending. Not suddenly, not with a single catastrophic moment, but slowly, like a wound that bleeds for centuries before the body finally fails. The ground still remembered Abel's blood. The cities of Cain had multiplied across the earth, their bronze shining, their music rising, their violence spreading like a contagion that no medicine could cure. The Nephilim walked among men, giants of corruption, shadows of what should never have been. And God, looking down upon his creation, saw that every intention of the thoughts of man's heart was only evil continually. In this world, dying, two men shared the same name. Both were named Lamech. Both lived in the final generations before the flood. Both would father sons who would shape the future. But one Lamech descended from the murderer Cain. The other descended from the appointed Seth. And the difference between them was the difference between judgment and mercy, between boast and prayer, between the city that would be washed away and the ark that would survive. This is the story of the two Lamechs. And it is the story of every choice that faces us when the world is ending. The first Lamech was the fifth from Cain, the great-great-great-grandson of the first murderer. He lived in the line that had begun with blood and built with bronze, that had multiplied vengeance and called it justice, that had replaced the presence of God with the achievements of men. His ancestors had built the city of Enoch. They had forged instruments of bronze and iron. They had made the world comfortable and the conscience numb, and Lamech took this inheritance and made it worse. The scripture says that he took two wives, Adah and Zillah. The first polygamist in the biblical record. The first man to look at the creation ordinance, one man and one woman, and declare it insufficient for his desires. He was not content with the gift. He wanted more. And in wanting more, he made the gift into nothing. This was the pattern of Cain's line. The pattern of multiplication without satisfaction, of acquisition without gratitude, of desire without boundary. Cain had murdered because his offering was rejected. Lamech multiplied wives because one was not enough. The sin of the father became the sin of the son, not in identical form but an identical heart, the heart that says I deserve more than I have been given, the heart that makes demands upon creation and calls them rights. But Lamech did not merely practice polygamy. He boasted of violence. The scripture records his words, the first poetry in the Bible after the fall, and it is poetry of blood. Adah and Zillah, hear my voice. You wives of Lamech, listen to what I say. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. If Cain is avenged sevenfold, truly Lamech 77-fold, this was not confession. This was not lament. This was boast. Lamech had killed, not in hot rage like his ancestor, but in cold calculation. And he had killed not merely for murder, but for wounding, for striking, for offenses that did not threaten his life. The escalation was complete. Cain had killed for rejection. Lamech killed for insult. And where Cain had received a mark of protection from God, Lamech claimed vengeance as his own right, multiplying it beyond divine measure, 77-fold. The number was deliberate. 7, the number of divine completion, multiplied by itself and then multiplied again. Lamech was not merely claiming protection. He was claiming divinity. He was saying that his vengeance was more perfect than God's mercy, that his justice was more complete than divine justice, that he had become the measure of all things. This is the end of the way of Cain. It begins with rejected offering and ends with self-deified vengeance. It begins with shame and ends with boast. It begins with one death and ends with 77. The other Lamech was the ninth from Seth, the great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandson of the appointed third son. He lived in the line that had called upon the name of the Lord, that had walked with God, that had preserved the memory of Eden through whispered promises across impossible distances. His ancestors had not built cities. They had built altars. They had not forged bronze. They had forged prayer. They had not multiplied vengeance. They had multiplied faithfulness, and this Lamech, son of Methuselah, father of Noah, carried this inheritance differently. The scripture gives us only one sentence about him, but that sentence is enough. When Lamech had lived 182 years, he fathered a son and called his name Noah, saying, "Out of the ground that the Lord has cursed, this one shall bring us relief from our work and from the painful toil of our hands." This was not boast. This was hope. This was not vengeance. This was prophecy. This was not multiplication of wives but multiplication of faith, the faith that God would provide, that the curse would be relieved, that the painful toil would end. The contrast could not be sharper. Where Cain's Lamech had named himself as source of vengeance, Seth's Lamech named God as source of hope. Where one had looked at his own strength and seen divinity, the other had looked at his own weakness and seen need. Where one had multiplied wives to satisfy desire, the other had received one son as gift beyond measure. Where one had killed for wounding, the other had suffered the curse and waited for relief. And the sons of these two men? Cain's Lamech fathered Jabal, the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. He fathered Jubal, the father of all those who play the lyre and pipe. He fathered Tubal-Cain, the forger of all instruments of bronze and iron. The culture of Cain continued, the civilization of the city, the comfort of technology, the anesthesia of art. And he fathered a daughter, Naamah, whose name means pleasant, the final irony of a line that had made pleasure from violence. But Seth's Lamech fathered Noah. And Noah would build the ark. Noah would survive the flood. Noah would become the second father of all living, the new Adam, the restart of creation. The line that had begun with Seth's appointment, that had continued through Enoch's walking, that had been preserved through Methuselah's long life, would now be carried through waters of judgment into world of mercy, the two Lamechs, same name, same generation, same dying world. One left culture that would drown. The other left salvation that would float. We are tempted to think that names determine destiny. That the Lamech of Cain was doomed by his ancestry, that the Lamech of Seth was blessed by his genealogy. But the scripture does not allow this fatalism. The line of Seth had produced its own failures. The sons of God had looked upon the daughters of men, and the Nephilim had walked the earth. Enoch had been taken, but the world had continued in corruption. Methuselah had lived 969 years, but his long life had not prevented the flood, and the line of Cain had not been without knowledge. They had heard the stories. They had seen the mark. They had known, in some way, that their ancestor had been protected by the very God they rejected. The opportunity for turning, for calling upon the name, for walking with God, had been available to them as well. The difference was not in the name. The difference was in the choice. Cain's Lamech chose to look at the world and see opportunity for vengeance. Seth's Lamech chose to look at the world and see need for grace. One chose to be source of justice. The other chose to wait for relief from God. One multiplied wives. The other received son as gift. One killed for wounding. The other suffered the curse, the same name. The same world. The same approaching flood. Different choices. Different destinies. This is the mystery of the two Lamechs. It is not about ancestry. It is not about environment. It is about the heart. The scripture tells us that God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. But it also tells us that Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord, that Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation, that Noah walked with God, the world was not uniformly wicked. Even in the generation of the flood, there was choice. Even in the line of Seth, there was need for grace. Even in the darkest age, there was light. The two Lamechs prove that the same name, the same circumstances, the same approaching judgment, can produce either boast or prayer, either vengeance or hope, either drowning or salvation, and this is the choice that faces us. We live in a world that feels, often, like it is ending. The violence multiplies. The corruption spreads. The Nephilim of our own age, whatever forms they take, walk among us. And we are tempted, like Cain's Lamech, to respond with vengeance, with boast, with multiplication of our own desires, with claiming divine rights for ourselves, or we are tempted, like Seth's Lamech, to respond with hope, with prophecy, with naming our children for the relief that God will provide, with suffering the curse and waiting for grace. The first Lamech died in the flood. The scripture does not say this explicitly, but it is implied. The line of Cain was washed away. The city of Enoch became sediment. The bronze and iron corroded. The 77-fold vengeance was silenced by waters that answered no boast. The culture that had seemed so permanent, so advanced, so necessary, proved to be grass that withers and flower that falls. The second Lamech died 5 years before the flood. His son Methuselah, whose name meant when he dies, it shall be sent, had lived 969 years, and when he died, the flood came. But Lamech of Seth did not see it. He died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them and greeted them from afar. He named his son Noah, and he died, and the ark was built, and the world was washed, and the line continued, which death was better. To die in the flood with boast upon your lips? Or to die before the flood with hope upon your tongue? To see your vengeance complete? Or to see your promise unfulfilled but believed? To drown in your own achievement? Or to rest in God's provision? The scripture answers. By faith Noah, being warned by God concerning events as yet unseen, in reverent fear constructed an ark for the saving of his household. By this he condemned the world and became an heir of the righteousness that comes by faith. The Lamech of Seth, though he did not build the ark, named the builder. The Lamech of Cain built culture that condemned itself. Look at your own name. It is not Lamech, but it carries inheritance. It carries the weight of ancestors, the pattern of family, the tendency of lineage. You may descend from Cain, from those who have built without God, who have multiplied without gratitude, who have boasted without humility. Or you may descend from Seth, from those who have called upon the name, who have walked with God, who have waited for grace, but descent is not destiny. The two Lamechs prove this. The same name, the same world, the same flood approaching, and one chose vengeance while the other chose hope. You are not trapped by your ancestry. You are not determined by your environment. You are not doomed by your past. You are invited to choose hope over vengeance. Choose prophecy over boast. Choose the relief that comes from God over the justice that comes from self. Choose to name your children for the future God will provide rather than for the present you can control. Choose to suffer the curse and wait for grace rather than to multiply your own desires and call them rights. Choose the ark over the city. Choose the line that floats over the culture that drowns. The world is ending. This is not pessimism. This is realism. Every world ends. Every civilization falls. Every culture that makes itself permanent proves to be temporary. The flood comes, in one form or another, to every generation. The waters rise, the judgment approaches, the old world passes away, and in every ending, there are two Lamechs. Those who boast of their vengeance. And those who hope in God's grace. Those who multiply their own desires. And those who receive God's provision. Those who build cities. And those who build arks. Those who drown in their achievement. And those who float in God's salvation. The choice is yours. The name you carry does not determine the destiny you choose. The world you inhabit does not determine the heart you cultivate. The flood that approaches does not determine the preparation you make. Be the Lamech who names Noah. Be the one who sees relief coming from the cursed ground. Be the one who hopes when hope seems impossible. Be the one who fathers the future rather than drowning in the present. Be the one who chooses grace. Subscribe now to walk through more ancient stories that explain our modern world. Hit the bell so you never miss the next chapter of humanity's hidden history. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that their name does not determine their destiny, that the same world can produce either boast or hope, that the flood is coming but the ark is being built. Comment below with the word hope if you commit to being the Lamech of Seth in a world of Lamechs of Cain, the one who names the future rather than drowning in the present. This is not just content. This is choice. This is destiny. This is the story that can save your life. Join us in the comments, in the community, in the continuing journey through the texts that built civilization. The next story is waiting. Are you? The two Lamechs are buried. One beneath the waters of judgment. One in the earth that would soon be washed. But their choices echo. The boast of vengeance or the prayer of hope. The multiplication of desire or the reception of grace. The city that drowns or the ark that floats. The same name. The same world. The same flood. Choose differently. Choose hope. Choose the Lamech who named Noah. And live.